How the Real Housewives pioneered the art of being a pretend girl boss. She was enjoyable to despise for starters. She was conceited, spoiled, and we suspected, harboring a great deal of hatred. She misinterpreted profit-seeking as feminism and extravagant spending as self-care, confusing the two for morality. Of course, I'm referring to the much maligned embodiment of female prosperity and status, the girl boss. Roughly speaking, the girl boss is a stereotype that represents women's professional ambition. It is typically associated with millennials, white people, and heterosexual genders. Before the pandemic and during Hillary Clinton's presidential defeat, she gained turbulent notoriety from 2016 until 2020. Although women in a specific tax bracket were the most well-known instances, girl bosses didn't necessarily need to be extremely successful. Rather, what set her apart was her sincerity, her conviction that her identity and the prospects of her career were closely linked. I was enraged by her on the one hand because of her pretentiousness, her bought beauty, and her critical ability. I felt it upsetting when the worst of the girl bosses appropriated feminist discourse in such a superficial and cynical way. The ladies who were given the title, whether by others or by themselves, ranged from the blatantly malevolent to the pathetically out of touch, as may be the case with wealthy people. Some were just annoying while some were nasty. However, it appears that the girl boss was a scapegoat or diversion, a class of women that garnered disdain disproportionate to their real numbers or power. Were we meant to learn something alarming about the ethically tainted status of feminism by learning that one fashion blogger was excessively harsh toward her assistant? Was another thought article about the wing really necessary for anyone? To avoid seeming cliched, an ambitious man is never made fun of as a boy boss. Seldom is the conceit and cruelty of individual men seen as a criticism of men in general, much less the validity of their entry into public life. However, the girl boss and her misdeeds serve as justification for criticizing large portions of feminist theory and history, if not the entire feminist movement. The general feeling, which was generally articulated in the form of a rhetorical question, was that she was a shining example of all the ways that feminism had gone wrong. Why would you want women to have more power in an unjust system? It escaped my understanding. Why had these particular women's shortcomings and failings come to be perceived as movement shortcomings? Who elevated the girl boss to a status greater than her actual self, and who laid the blame for it on feminism? A bit of a fruitless endeavor trying to track out the girl boss's ancestors. The phrase was intended to be aspirational when it was first used in 2014 by Sofia Amoruso, the CDO of Nasty Gal, a fast fashion company. Rather, it turned awkward almost immediately. However, the idea that a woman's career aspirations can be seen as a form of political expression is far older, having originated from the liberal subset of the second wave of feminism. The Feminine Mystique, a book written by Betty Friedan concerning the anti-feminist backlash that followed World War II and the position of the suburban housewife that many white middle-class women were forced into as a result, was published in 1963. Housewives were looked down upon as cognitively retarded grown-up children and respected as morally pure guardians in the post-war home. Their labor-intensive, monotonous, unpaid, and denigrated work involved cooking, cleaning, and childcare. Friedan, the psychologist by profession, believed that housewives were psychologically disabled and incapable of leading fulfilling lives outside the home. A highly gendered domesticity has devolved into a form of mental illness. Friedan saw paid employment as the solution. Nowadays, the majority of people who bring up Friedan's book do so to point out its flaws. And there are a ton of flaws in the feminine mystique. Millions more women at the time found resonance in her work nevertheless. Housewives genuinely desired a more prominent position for themselves and felt that their lives were restricted and dehumanizing. Getting these women out of the house and into the paid sector, and supporting them as they advanced there, was one of the key goals of the mainstream feminist agenda for decades. It was arguably the most influential and successful effort of the second wave. The Federal Reserve reported that women's involvement in the paid workforce was 38.2% in February 1963, the year Friedan released her book. 37 years later, in April 2000, it reached its peak at 60.3%. Since then, there has been a drop in the percentage of women in paid work, but it has been relatively modest. Today, slightly less than 57% of women are employed. These exhortations to women to stop working are overly protesting. They are too fast to hail the departure of individual women from public life as a liberating trend and too slow to accept the legitimacy of individual women's contributions to public life, no matter how flawed. At its worst, the rejection of the girl boss appeared to be a simple, unoriginal type of misogyny disguised in a cheap, anti-capitalist mask. This is not always the case, though. Was there a deeper meaning behind the constant criticism of the girl boss, or was it just a covert disquiet about the fact that some of that authority was in the hands of women? Distribute. However, the hate of the girl boss also appears to portend something darker if she is merely the latest manifestation of a long tradition of denigrating women's ambition. As a result of the pandemic forcing a disproportionate number of women out of employment, the criticism of Girlboss began to fade in 2020. The service industry, which is dominated by women, had a worse impact than other sectors. When the schools closed, someone had to stay behind to watch the children and oversee the excruciating charade known as online learning. That someone was typically mom. Even when the United States stumbles out of the pandemic, women's employment hasn't fully returned. In addition, women are already suffering the most as we teeter into a recession. Now that Roe has been overturned and abortion is illegal in large portions of the nation, many more women's goals will be restricted. Unwanted pregnancies and forced motherhood will drive women to drop out of school, quit their careers, and take on low-paying full-time caregiving responsibilities for no pay at all. Women will increasingly become what so many of them aspire to avoid, relying on friends, charity, or man's salary. One valid criticism of liberal feminism in the aftermath of Girlboss is that it presented paid jobs as a question of personal fulfillment as opposed to financial security. The feminist mainstream has long promoted the idea that women may develop into more whole, healthy people through paid employment, in line with freedom. The takeaway isn't to get wealthy enough to escape male dominance. The message is clear. Women should explore new roles outside of the home and reject traditional duties within it. However, aside from an extremely fortunate few, paid employment has not provided a means of achieving self-actualization. Rather, a large portion of paid employment is undervalued, boring, and lacks ethical expression for both men and women. Your paid employment probably won't provide your life complete meaning unless you're exceptionally fortunate or already quite wealthy. You need a priest or therapist for that, not a boss. However, this does not mean that paid work cannot resolve the material issues raised by misogyny. It just means that it cannot treat all spiritual issues. The truth is that having a paid job gives women more freedom. Otherwise, there wouldn't be such a persistent and long-lasting campaign to discredit women who choose to seek it. This concludes today's video. Did you enjoy it? Please share your thoughts in the comments section below. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel for more engaging and informative content.